Scientists are coming closer every day to better understanding how the brain works. The full picture still remains a mystery despite the investment in money and research hours. Brain researcher Keith Henry is here to talk about his research on how the brain communicates. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, first of all, what is your position here at the university?
I'm an assistant professor at the School of Medicine.
Okay. And what about your research? What do you do, if you can explain it? I mean, this is one of those situations where you could say, well, it's not brain science. Well, it is brain science. So what exactly are you doing?
Well, we study the proteins in the brain that interact with drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, ecstasy, and also antidepressants. And so while these drugs vary in their response, we're trying to understand how they interact with these same proteins and give very different behavioral effects.
Okay. And with your research, you're working with students as well?
Correct.
And do you use a lot of technology, computer modeling, that sort of thing?
Yes, so one of the things that we're trying to do is use in silico modeling. So instead of wasting a lot of time on materials and reagents, we can try and reenact or model what happens in the cell but in the computer. And by doing that, we can save a lot of time and effort, and we're becoming closer and closer to being able to correctly model how compounds like cocaine interact with these proteins.
Okay. Did you ever consider doing anything else? Like when you went to college, did you say, okay, I want to be a brain researcher?
Yeah, I sort of floated around at first. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I had a scholarship in music when I first started at the university. But, you know, going from class to class, and then I finally took a course in the physiological basis of behavior, and that really changed sort of my direction and sort of led me straight into science.
Okay, what was the catalyst for getting into research for you?
So I was taking a course in genetics, and the TA, the teaching assistant, said, you probably should get in a lab and try that out. And so I took her up on it, and I went and found a lab and started working. And I found an incredible mentor who just really took me in and showed me the ropes and really opened up science to me, and that was very important.
So when did it click? What did that mentor do for you to get you so excited about this?
Sort of showed me what studying science is really about. Usually when you're in a class and you're taking a lab, that's nothing like what it really is in a laboratory. And so just opening the doors of the complexities, the intricacies, but also the beauties of science and the body of cells and just biological findings.
Okay. Well, how are you working towards curing addiction or depression in your research with what you're doing?
So we're trying to, as I said, trying to understand how the drugs like cocaine and antidepressants bind to these transporters. And since they both of these classes of drugs bind, when they bind, what happens after that? So, but the first thing is understand where they bind to these proteins. And so by understanding that, we could have drugs that could go in and not allow, say, cocaine to bind at its target, and therefore help somebody who's addicted. It's called replacement therapy, where it could replace cocaine and not give the addictive behavior that cocaine has.
Sure. What about the difference between the antidepressants and cocaine?
So cocaine's kind of what we call a dirty drug, in that it binds a lot of these transporters at the same time, a lot of different classes, whereas antidepressants typically target one or two of these transporters. And cocaine, sort of uniquely, it binds to the dopamine system, and the dopamine system is the reward pathway or the addictive pathway in our brain.
Okay. Well, and you have a personal story tied to depression and your research. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when I was young, my father was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I saw immediately how his mood changed. He sort of just went inward and sort of closed in. And he was very depressed, and as you know, rightly, I guess he could be, or was right to do so. But for me, it really, I saw him as a different person almost immediately, and just having to deal with that weight of a terminal illness and how that can change your personality so dramatically. And I hope you hope that one day through your research that you'll be able to help individuals to sort of reclaim their life if something like this happens, or they're just chronically depressed. It can really enable them to live better and fuller lives.
Sure. And with your research, like we said, you are working with students. What about that part of your job? What is it that you take away from that at the end of the day when you're working with students?
I'd say that's my true joy. I love explaining and working with the student and developing their ability to think and to ask questions and then find ways to answer those questions. And so and seeing the light bulb go on, you know, explaining a concept and then them getting it, and when they get it, just be open doors for them that they can just sort of grow and become better scientists.
With your research and the students, have you had Eureka moments where you were able to celebrate with them?
Oh, definitely. So you just wait and see what they can come up with, and then because you want that independence, you want them to sort of say, I discovered this, and so you're very much celebrating those types of successes.
Sure. That's the high for a researcher, is
Right.
finding something, right? Well, you talked about having a mentor. How important do you think it is for people in your field to have something like that?
I think that's very important, especially in the very beginning when you're first learning, because that's the time when you need the hand on your shoulder to help guide you and to understand, you know, what's right, what's wrong, how to approach science in a correct fashion. Later on, you can get the tough mentor that, you know, expects more out of you, but at first you need that sort of development and that nurturing, I think.
All right. One last question for you. How is your research going to fit into the big picture 10, 20 years from now, in your hopes anyway?
Well, I hope that we can just try and understand, for instance, antidepressants, probably the #1 prescribed medication in the developed world. We can at least understand the basics of how it works in the brain, because even now we don't understand some of the basics of how these drugs interact. And so by understanding that, we hope we can develop better medicines and just help the society in general.
Sure. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and good luck in your research.
Thank you.